Yeah, just Copper Search is a IOCG focused explorer in South Australia. We've been trading at around about between 20 and 30 cents with a market cap at the moment of $21 million. And what I want to define for your investors today is what's the difference between Copper Search and other companies that have been exploring in South Australia in the Gawler Craton for IOCGs. And the really and while the other part is to say that Copper Search is a relatively new entrant to the ASX, but it doesn't mean the project's a new project. Copper Search is a spin out of McCallum Group, a privately held high net worth backed in mineral exploration group out of Perth. And they picked up the ground, or they built a really solid ground position in the very top northeast corner of the Gawler Craton over the last 5 years. So this is not a brand new listing on a brand new project. It's a listing of a company that's been spun out specifically to test the top northeast corner of the Gawler Craton for IOCGs. Now, the top northeast corner is slightly different to the rest of the Gawler Craton in terms of the depth that we're seeing our targets. Our targets are, by and large, less than 500 metres deep. So to the south, you're probably seeing some news flow around Oak Dam West, which is BHP's discovery or drill out phase at the moment, and they're putting 14 drill rigs on that. They're drilling that target. The top of it's about 800 metres down to about 1,400 metres below surface. Most of our targets are less than 500 metres and in what's called the Peak and Denison domain, an area of South Australia that was a little bit overlooked, and I'll get onto that later. Perhaps we just go to the next slide, please. As I said earlier, our market cap is circa sort of hovers between about 19 and 25 million. And we have a very strong cash position of $7.5 million reported in our last quarterly. So we have more than enough cash to drill for the next 18 months. And we have a very strong ground position there and a very tightly held registry. Our top 20 shareholders hold over 66% of the company. Next slide, please. And just a little bit about what makes Copper Search a successful explorer. What makes a successful explorer? I think it's something that you should be asking yourself. And to me, the number one thing is the right team. The right team will look for the right commodities in the right timing in the market, and they'll find the right projects in the right jurisdictions. And certainly South Australia is in the Fraser Institute top 10 jurisdictions in the world in terms of compliance and prospectivity. And the right team will also look and test the best drill targets and attract the right funding. And certainly, I think that's something you should take a look at every time I invest in a company. That's certainly the list that I go down through that. And the right team, I'd like to just maybe the next slide, please. The right team is absolutely critical as an explorer. We are pre-discovery, and on the board side, on the left-hand side of the page, we've got multiple discoveries that have ended up in exits and large exits as well. Over $4 billion worth of shareholder value has been created by the team on the left-hand side of the page. And a notable South Australian explorer with a very good track record, Tony Belperio, who's also a member of our technical advisory panel. He actually discovered the Prominent Hill mine in the Gawler Craton, which is one of the three big IOCG discoveries, being Olympic Dam, Carrapateena, and Prominent Hill. So ex-head of the mines department. So we've got a really strong board there. And on the exploration team side of things, one of the critical people is your geophysicist. So much of the work that we're doing is undercover and at some sort of depth. So we're using a lot of geophysics to define our drill targets. Theo Vanis, our principal geophysicist, has over 25 years of experience. Notably, he was 18 years as a chief geophysicist for Rio Tinto's global exploration group. So he has looked at mineral systems all over the planet and is is a real gun and has really helped us refine our targets. John Main, Technical Advisory Panel Chair, over nearly 40 years in the industry, ex-head of Rio Tinto Exploration for the Americas. So a great sort of sounding board for us in some of those technical advisory panels. Also, the process that we're going through is the exploration team, also Richard Hill and some other notable Paris silver deposit discovery success there. So we've got a really good team. We've got a good board, and we've got I think a fantastic patch of ground in the Peak and Denison in the northeast corner of South Australia. And what we've done over the last 6 months is we've gone back through all of our tenements. We've looked at, when I started about a year ago, we had 40 geophysical targets, and we've worked that back down to 6 high priority targets, and we've committed to drilling 4 of them. Each of those 4 has the scale potential to be a Carapatina or a prominent hill scale of IOCG. So as I said, we're about to go drilling. In about 2 weeks, we're going to be starting our drill program. 5 years in the making, with refining 40 prospects or 40 geophysical anomalies down into 6 high priority targets. We're committed to the first 4, and we've gone through all the process on that, and we're fully funded for the next 18 months of drilling. So a really good time to come into the company. I'll probably just talk very briefly about copper, perhaps the next slide. And with the copper boom, I guess you're either a copper bull or you're not. I certainly am. And looking at some of the recent reports from Wood Mackenzie, we have to increase our supply by about 30% over the next 10 years to meet the current net climate targets. And that's going to require us to, as they say in their report, the industry will need to deliver new projects at a frequency and consistent level of investment never previously accomplished. So never previously accomplished. So, I mean, this means that projects that have got copper in the ground, like Malcolm's, Sunstone, is going to just keep increasing in value. And those majors are just they're swooping in worldwide, looking to put their foot on any contained copper, nickel, lithium, those commodities that are essential for meeting those net zero climate targets. And to put it in real terms and in South Australian terms, I'll just go to the next slide. What we have to do as an industry, if we have to put into production the equivalent of 47 Olympic dam mines, so to meet that not only discover, but to put it into production. So I can only see one way for the copper price to go, and that is clearly up. Let's just go to the next slide. So where are we? As I've mentioned a couple of times, these other IOCGs in South Australia, Prominent Hill, Olympic Dam, Carapatina. As you can see, they're all well over 1 million tonnes of contained copper. Prominent Hill was a lot larger than that before it was started mining. The Peak project occupies the ground right up in the northeast corner. Now, what's different about it, and why didn't people explore this so much before? The rocks, the intrusions there are about 50 million years younger than the intrusions that Olympic Dam, Prominent Hill were formed from. So, but it's actually, so people didn't really sort of put too much credence on that area. There was some work there. There's very few drill holes. And we'll just go to the next slide, and we'll see why we thought for a couple of reasons why we like the Peak and Denison area. It was hypothesized for a long time that perhaps the Gawler Craton on the left-hand side, you can see it was actually positioned butting up against the Mount Isa, the Cloncurry district of Mount Isa, and a thermal event that gave rise to the IOCGs to the south kept moving north, and at the time it then started forming the IOCGs in the Cloncurry and the Mount Isa super basin. And then that has then ripped away over 1.5 billion years. And we've actually kept in South Australia, in our top corner, we've got a little chunk of Queensland in there, in a sort of Cloncurry lookalike rocks and the same age of intrusions. And that was a great theory. And then I'll just go to the next slide. And then very recently, just along structure, Oz Minerals funded 2 drill holes that intersected basement and hit 2 out of 2 IOCG mineralisation on the adjacent ground to us. along structure. So it's proved that the Peak and Denniston area is prospective for IOCGs and a lot shallower than in the southern part of the Gawler Craton. So that's been really good news. We'll just keep going. Next slide, please. As I said, we've only got basement intersections, one drill hole per 200 square kilometres. So it is a wide open space, a lot of room to make discoveries. And we said, well, how are we going to explore? We've got 5,500 square kilometres of project area. What is our targeting methodology going to be? So next slide, please. So we went and worked with the PGN geoscience guys out of Monash, who have worked in the Cloncurry district and throughout South Australia for IOCGs. And we did a lithostructural analysis using a recently flown government-funded airborne survey, which allowed us to do this for the first time at this level of detail, and it identified the main structures. So I'll just go to the next slide. These main structures that Mesoproterozoic structures, 1.5 billion years old, same age as the Cloncurry structures that allowed the emplacement of those breccias and gave rise to the IOCGs in the Cloncurry district. We see the same age structures there. We see the same intrusions, and lo and behold, they match up to where the Oz Minerals funded drilling discovered 2 IOCGs on the adjacent ground with what was D Metallica, which was then taken over by AIC Mines just recently. So that's our targeting methodology, was to proximity to that structure, infill with gravity, look at any magnetic anomalies, and then rank it against known examples throughout Australia of IOCGs. And if we had a valid target, it had to rank as a lookalike to a Carapatina, a Prominent Hill, or an Ernest Henry, pre-discovery lookalike in terms of its geophysical characteristics. Next slide, please. So what we went through that process, and I said we had 40 geophysical anomalies. We've whittled that down to 6, and we've committed to drilling 4, and we're starting that in around about 2 weeks' time. So a really exciting time for the company, 5 years in the making, and here we are about to go out in the paddock and hit our 4 best drill targets. We've whittled down from 40. So we also, let's just go to the next slide, please. As I said there, some of those, there's a bit of a table of our top 4, the milligauss response, which is a good way to compare between other known IOCGs. Prominent Hill was around about a 2 milligauss response in terms of its gravity response. And so you can see there we've got sort of, they're right in the ballpark of the scale potential, as well as being that large scale, tier 1 type of target that we're going for. Let's just go to the next slide. And we've probably not time to go into the actual gravity shells and the targets and the structural setting, but needless to say, we've worked on these over the last and kept on infilling with gravity and more structural analysis and 3D inversions. So we're really confident on our 4 targets, and we're really looking forward to get out in the field. The other thing we're also doing is doing go to the next slide, a district-wide target identification program, looking at any other style of mineralisation that could be potentially a copper style, ISCG, iron sulfur copper gold. And we've just undertaken a regional AEM, airborne electromagnetic survey, and we've just processing the results of that to help us generate some further targets in the northern part of the project area. But again, looking forward to getting out on the drill rig in about 2 weeks' time and testing what has been 5 years in the making. Thanks very much.
Do you want to touch on the last slide there, Duncan?
Oh no, I think I ran through it in words, but obviously we're fully funded, and we've got 7.5 million in the bank, and so we're looking at a really good position there.
So just question-wise, you kind of mentioned some big deposits there in Prominent Hill and Olympic Dam, of course. What are those key similarities you see from the Peak and Denniston area? Yeah,
so I guess we're seeing that the gravity signature is telling us that we've got a gravity response that is unusual, and it is of a significant excess mass. So we're looking at the excess mass balance of what could have caused, all of a sudden there's something that's a lot heavier than the basement rocks should be. And that's usually some sort of mineralization system, some sort of metalliferous system as well in general. So, but it could be an iron sulfide, and there might not be a lot of copper with it, but potentially there is. And that's exactly what we're going out to test with the drill bit.
And, we're talking about right place, right time, but you also said it kind of took 5 years in the making. What took so long?
Yeah, so I guess establishing the ground position, took a bit of time in South Australia. Sometimes there's other parties there just sort of squatting on ground, and it's sort of it does take a little while, I say, to sort of build your ground position. Also, the Gawler Craton Airborne Survey took 18 months to fly, and that enabled some 2017 to 19. They then released the data in 2021. And that meant that we didn't have to go out and fly that ourselves. So that was a huge data set, flown over a significant part of the Gawler Craton at 200-metre flight lines. That allowed us to do that lithostructural analysis, and also allowed our neighbours, D Metallica, to do the same thing, and then bring Oz Minerals in and with a JV and fund those drill holes where they discovered 2 out of 2 IOCGs right next door. So, IOCG chalcopyrite magnetite mineralisation that is probably near misses, and I imagine that Oz Minerals are a little bit otherwise occupied right now. Otherwise, I think they'd be out there drilling and following up those 2 intercepts.
And I think you're relatively newly listed. How does the kind of new drilling program compare to the original program?
Yeah, we listed around about 18 months ago. The first drill program, we were sort of looking at an innovative geophysical technique, which was trying to identify breccia shear pipes through sort of an algorithm. That we went out and drill tested a couple of those, and it ended up not being quite as it ended up not working, basically. So we ended up pivoting and going back to doing the lithostructural analysis. I joined the company after that. It's sort of not quite a year ago. I sort of came in and we just did a bit of a review of our targeting technique and came up with this approach. And I think working with the PGN geoscience guys who've worked certainly through on IOCGs across all of Australia, and ranking all of our targets in comparison to other known targets. So not just drilling what's our best target, we're drilling targets that are equivalent in terms of their prospectivity to a prominent hill or an Ernest Henry. That's a big difference.
Duncan, that's all we got time for. Appreciate your time. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, Tim.